What is a true fact that sounds like a conspiracy theory? Project Sunshine, in which the US government, in the wake of dropping atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, ordered a major study to better understand the effects of radiation exposure/nuclear fallout on the human body, so an international network of agents was recruited to locate recently deceased children and steal body parts from them to use for testing. Reddit admins have access to an infinite amount of gold. This is so that they can give gold to posts/comments they want to see rise quickly, and in turn, will promote content that Reddit wants advertisers to see. Edit, u/spez. Bohemian Grove. Some of the world's most rich and powerful men meet up for a retreat in California. The Monster Study. The Monster Study was a stuttering experiment performed on 22 orphan children in Davenport, Iowa in 1939. It was conducted by Wendell Johnson at the University of Iowa. Graduate student Mary Tula conducted the experiment under Johnson's supervision. Half of the children received positive speech therapy, praising the fluency of their speech, and the other half negative speech therapy, belittling the children for speech imperfections. Many of the normal speaking, orphan children who received negative therapy in the experiment suffered negative psychological effects, and some retained speech problems for the rest of their lives. Project Northwoods. JFK was proposed an idea from the CIA in which they would rain terror on the American people via random terrorist attacks, military ships being sunk, and plane hijackings in which they would blame on Cuba, and therefore get the public behind the idea to go to war with Cuba. Thankfully, JFK declined. The reason only the orange variety of carrots is widely available is because the Dutch like the color orange. They leverage their powerful trade networks to make it so. The Hawaiian royalty was toppled by a fruit company Dole. The FBI was constantly stalking Ernest Hemingway, and that led to his suicide. The US government did biological warfare testing on the public in San Francisco. Bioweapon testing in San Francisco. GM bought the electric railcar system, then destroyed the tracks. Both the US and Russia use dolphins and whales to spy on countries. Edit, the US also uses seals as in the animals for protection at some of their marine bases. And thank you for so many upvotes. The ancient Egyptians had a pregnancy test that actually worked. The CIA has a real deal heart attack gun. It was exposed to the public in the 70s. Edit, here's an article/video about it. It's entirely possible to receive your tax forms pre-filled by the US government. They already have all your information, and this is the way it's done in other Western nations. Unfortunately, the owners of TurboTax have paid off enough congressmen to keep it from happening. In fact, they are not content with just stopping it. They want to make sure it's impossible forever, and they are about to succeed. Happy Tax Day. Project Acoustic Kitty. Basically, the CIA wanted to put microphones and transmitters inside of cats and use them to spy on the Soviets in the 1960s. It cost about $20 million and was a huge failure. Allegedly, the first attempt at this resulted in the cat running out into the street and getting run over by a car almost immediately. The US government pardoned hundreds of Japanese war criminals who did things that would have made Joseph Mengele blush in exchange for their research on biological warfare that they conducted on live human subjects. Not really a conspiracy, but I recently read that the Department of Navy and ARPA released Tor to the general public so people could create enough noise to mask the real agents who would need it. During Prohibition, the US government added poisons to industrial alcohols because they were being chemically modified for consumption. This resulted in many deaths that the government justified by saying the dead had been breaking the law. Mars is completely populated by alien robots. The FBI murdered Fred Hampton. The existence of Project Ncultura. Canada has amassed 90% of its population within 100 miles of the US border. The US conducted a fake vaccination drive to find Osama bin Laden. Nestle is pretty much a supervillain. Neil Armstrong had to fill out an immigration form when he arrived back to the US from the moon. The dolphin LSD experiment. NASA put a woman in a room that was flooded up to her hips and let a dolphin loose in there to live with her in order to attempt to teach the dolphin to speak English, and LSD was later used on the dolphin to see if it had some kind of reaction and if it affected its speech lessons. Saddam Hussein was given the key to the city of Detroit. The FBI actively worked to discredit and stop the civil rights movement. The Tuskegee syphilis experiment. I'm several dozens of comments deep, and from what I've learned so far, I've come to the conclusion that the USA really needs to rein it in. The egg industry as a whole embarked on a 2-year war on a single vegan mayo brand. There is a little bit of oxygen on the moon. Almost all of the oxygen in Earth's atmosphere for the last 2.5 billion years came from photosynthesis. That means the moon's rocks have been picking up small amounts of oxygen from living things on Earth. The moon is contaminated with the waste products of plants, the researchers said. There is a high security vault somewhere in the frozen tundra. I seriously think it is in Antarctica, that is full of seeds. Just seeds of almost every known plant species, donated by world governments. In case an apocalypse event happens, and we need to repopulate that one type of grape. Recently declassified documents show that the CIA had at least some involvement in the coup d'etat that overthrew Chilean President Salvador Allende. During the coup, not only was Allende's palace bombed, but 40,000 leftists were taken to the National Football Stadium, where they were tortured for months. It was a prison camp. Thousands of people were killed or disappeared. Allende's replacement, Augusto Pinochet. I know that the consequences of the coup were out of the hands of the US, but the domino effect of these actions is still crazy to me. The reason people in the US tend to circumcise is because Kellogg, the guy who invented cereal, gained a platform preaching puritanical ideas about how circumcision would prevent masturbation. In fact, the original cereal he created was purposely bland and disgusting in a further attempt to give America a proverbial cold shower. Edit. His brother was the one who invented cereal with nutrition in mind, but with the same ideas in mind. The CIA ran experiments with LSD at McGill University in Montreal. Starfish's mouths are located on the center of their bodies, and in most mermaid movies they use starfish to cover their boobies. Pretty weird, man. What's going on there, Yano? America didn't want to say they lost the Vietnam War, so they sent troops there for 6 more years, even though according to them, it was impossible to win. This was in the Pentagon Papers. Also the entirety of the USA Patriot Act of 2001. Less than 1% of the population owns more than 90% of the wealth. That the US government spies on Americans and holds communications in the largest data center in the world in UT, hoping to one day break the encryption and read the data. In 1999, Russia killed 300 of its own innocent citizens and injured 1,000 more through a series of terror bombings of apartment buildings. The goal was to motivate public support for a war in Chechnya and to bring Vladimir Putin to power. It worked. Some of the perpetrators were caught red-handed by local law enforcement. After they were caught and identified as federal agents, the FSB said it had been a training exercise. The evidence is considerable and damning. Divulging details about the plan is also the reason Litvinenko was poisoned. The US government forcibly sterilized minorities until the 1970s. 50% of Native American women were sterilized between 1970 and 1976. Some women were told they couldn't receive welfare unless they were sterilized first. Some were told they would no longer receive healthcare if they refused. Some women were told that the procedure was reversible when it was not. Some women went to the hospital for something like a tonsillectomy and were given hysterectomies while they were unconscious. It's amazing to me that this isn't widely known. Johnson & Johnson knew there was asbestos in baby powder for 40 years. The whole story of Rasputin's death sounds too absurd to be true. For those of you who don't know the full story, in late 1916 Rasputin was invited to the husband of the Tsar's niece's house, where he was offered cakes laced with cyanide. Rasputin ate these, and also drank 3 glasses of poisoned wine. He was then shot in the chest close to his heart, and was thought to be dead. When he was checked he got up, and fought off his attacker, who then shot him in the back followed by the head, before beating him heavily with a truncheon. They then wrapped his body in cloth and drove him to a nearby bridge, and threw his body off into the freezing river. He was found dead a few days later with the cause of death being drowning, and he still had the strength to try and claw his way out of the ice. TL. Dr. Rasputin was poisoned 4 times, shot in the back and chest, and then once in the forehead, heavily beaten with rumors of castration, then thrown into a freezing river and still survived, only dying of drowning. Still TL. Doctor? Listen to the song by Boney M. That's a bop. The US government tested drugs and chemical weapons on its own soldiers and various animals during the Cold War at the Edgewood Arsenal facility. It's also where we got bulletproof vests and some vaccines. If you want to ruin your day, look up Bad Trip to Edgewood. Komodo dragons can reproduce asexually, and if left unchecked, will one day become the dominant species of the Earth. Pokemon Go was partially funded by the CIA and NSA. The same day the Pentagon destroyed LifeLog, a database tracking a person's entire existence, Facebook was born. Just a coincidence. Nothing to see here. Edit. Wow, my first silver. Thank you, kind Redditor. For that, I'll leave one more trip down the rabbit hole for ya. Enjoy. In 50 years, Snowden. Ketchup contains nicotine. Number 1. In 1945, corporations paid 50% of federal taxes. Now they pay about 5%. Number 2. In 1900, 90% of Americans were self-employed. Now it's about 2%. It's called consolidation. Strengthen governments and corporations, weaken individuals. With taxes, this can be done imperceptibly over time.